Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, we should be joined by live Skype link by Alex Thompson from the Netherlands. We're waiting to see whether we can establish that communication. More on that later. But we are delighted to welcome onto today's news Dr. Graham Downing, who's going to be talking about what's in medication. Before we get there, the weather across the country seems to be dull-ish, still with some rain, brightening up a little bit in Plymouth, but my goodness, it was pretty grey this morning for virtually, well, midsummer, or are we heading to the winter, Mike?
It's hard to say.
Hard to say.
Hard to say.
Well, the good news is apparently we can now trust newspapers. Is this right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers. And apparently the Panama Papers have boosted trust in journalism. The Panama Papers, the biggest leak of internal documents in recent history, uncovered important stories that have been hidden from the public. Since publication started nearly 3 months ago, the project has spurred readers around the world to regain trust in the media, one of our industry's greatest challenges. So there you go. This was the largest ever collaboration of its kind. 400 journalists, 100 countries around the world, working together to fulfill one of the core tasks of independent journalism, which is apparently its investigation. Well, they say this investigation was kept secret for a year. When the newsrooms were offered the undisclosed documents in spring of last year, they quickly realized they couldn't do the investigation by themselves. They had to work together, not because of the volume of the leak, but also because you need to be familiar with the country, the politics, the language, the economic and social situation to research the documents. And so they started this collaboration with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. We might as well give up, Brian, and believe what we're told by the Daily Mail.
I think not, actually. I think we will continue to put out the facts as we see them and the truth as we find it. I don't think we're going to be relying on that crowd at all. I believe that we have actually lost Alex Thompson today, so that's a shame, but we will carry on.
Well, we'll keep trying. In the meantime, I was speaking to Dr. Graham Downing a day or two ago, and he sent me across this paper from Oxford Journals, the journal Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience Journal, from painkiller to empathy killer. And really, Graham, this is about paracetamol. I can't hear you, Graham. Have you got your mic muted?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, good afternoon. Yeah, it was an interesting paper because the reason why I kind of flagged it up is because paracetamol is probably one of the most widely used medications for from babies up to adults. I mean, you give it from the dosage from 1 to 6 is significant, and also for adults. I think it's probably at any point in time there's 23% of the population on this stuff. Probably about 70% of adults have had it at any one time, and probably about 85% of kids nowadays. So it's a huge area of people, if you like, huge numbers of people. So when you see something like this, then it's really significant. And what did you think of the paper? What was your interpretation when I sent it to you?
What it seems to be suggesting is that, as the title says, from painkiller to empathy killer, it's having an effect on people's minds. People are losing empathy. And it is one of the big questions that we have been asking is why are people seeming not to care anymore, Graham? And we won't mention any particular brands, but there's a certain brand of paracetamol which seems to get shoved down the throats of babies and young children from the age of nothing. And so the question that I really want to ask you is, based on what your understanding of this paper is, what damage does that do to children as they grow up into adults?
Well, I mean, this paper is pretty clear. What it's saying is, it's a pretty low dose. You're right, I won't mention any names, but it's probably in about 600 different medications, and it's in a particular medication that people give to their babies. Unfortunately, they dole it out like sweets, which you mustn't do with this stuff. You've got to be very judicial in how you how you use this stuff. You really can't just be, just taking it like sweets. But what they found was, it was really interesting. There's areas of the brain in different parts of the areas. One's called the anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insular cortex, and these are parts of the brain that seems to light up with empathy. So when you see someone who's suffering socially, maybe because they're being excluded or they've got physical pain, these areas light up, and they also light up when you experience those things as well. So they were saying that, well, if you affect these areas, somehow will that affect your ability to have empathy with someone else in pain. And what they found was that paracetamol and acetaminophen in the States does that. It does affect these areas. It kind of dulls these areas, if you like. And they found, and it wasn't thousands and thousands of participants, but it was enough to get significant reading and finding, if you like, and findings. And they found it actually did dull someone's empathy. And of course, you don't want to dull empathy. You want to, when you look at someone in pain, you want to feel something as a human being. Otherwise, you're a sociopath. Or a psychopath. And, there's enough sociopaths and psychopaths in the world, thank you very much. And if someone is a sociopath because that's just the way they are, then obviously, I'm not blaming those people, but obviously people who go on to develop criminal activities because of that lack of empathy and other things, and obviously that's wrong. And that's your area of expertise, not mine. But I was quite shocked by this. Now, this isn't the only concern that we have over paracetamol. And bearing in mind that the dosage they gave for this was about 1 gram. And I think the maximum dose over a day is 4 grams. And I think in children, the maximum dose is 1 gram. So you're approaching your overdoses that children would have in a day, and you're about a quarter of the maximum dose of an adult. And you've got that effect. Now, bearing in mind that 85% of kids are going to be having this stuff, and presently 70% of adults, that's really significant. And you guys could probably spin off and take that in all different directions, but just keeping with the kind of biochemistry and other topics that are allied to it, this also links into autism. I don't think I mentioned that to you, did I, Mike, before?
No, you didn't. No.
Okay, do you want me to elaborate on that?
Go for it.
Yeah, because there's an enzyme in the body, and it's called phenylsulfonylureas, and it's an enzyme which is really important in breaking down certain products in the body. You need to just kind of detoxify, if you like. But when you take paracetamol, there are certain kids who don't make that enzyme very well, or they don't make it very well at all. And they can't break down these products very well, like paracetamol. And what tends to happen is it pushes this pathway into a different product, and you then make a very long word, which is N-acetyl P-benzoquinone imine, which is a long word, is a product. And what that does, we call it NAPQI for short. And what that does, it goes around the body and it prevents you from detoxifying, the host of chemicals that hit us on a daily basis. And what happens is sensitive areas get attacked, like fat, that's your brain, protein, nucleic acids, DNA, and it causes damage. And also, what we find with paracetamol, it depletes glutathione in the brain. And that's really important, because when you deplete that, you get something called Purkinje cell death. And all of these things you find consistently with autistic kids. Now, the interesting thing about that is when they give the jabs full of the adjuvants with all the nasty things in them, in the vaccines, they can also kind of prophylactically, if you like, give paracetamol at the same time to say, oh, look, this will prevent a spike in temperature. This will help the child. So what you're doing a 1-2. You're providing the nasty stuff in the vaccine that the body's got to deal with, and then you're giving the stuff that's going to help shut down in certain children, because of this defect in phenylsulfotransferase, the ability to detoxify this stuff. And studies show, compared to controls with the MMR, for example, which is everyone talks about that vaccine, that probably kids that have autism are 8 times kind of more likely to be ill post MMR, and 6 times more likely to be given paracetamol. So this is another area of research that people are looking at that no one's been told about. And the problem we've got is people are handing paracetamol like it's candy. And you really do have to be very cautious when you're using medication of any kind, especially something like this.
So, I mean, you're a doctor. So, what is the advice for parents that have children with high temperatures? Is it sensible to just feed them paracetamol, or should they just let the temperature run its course? And I think we
Critical
have.
point, we've lost it.
Are you back, Graham?
Hi there, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just a bit. I think I just lost your signal, so I'm not sure
Yes.
if I'm talking. Are you still there?
We're here, yes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, you're good. I mean, the reality is, I'm not an allopathic doctor, thank God. I'm a functional medicine doctor. No disrespect to allopathic doctors, but you have to follow the advice on the packet. You've got to deal with a trained professional. You know, I always say to people, look for a homeopath, look for a herbalist doctor, because there are many alternatives, you know, to just sticking a dangerous drug in. Look, if you're screaming in pain and you need to take something, then for God's sake, take something, but do it appropriately based on proper advice and what the labels say. Don't just think, oh, I've got a pain, or my son's fallen over, I'll just give him a bit of, you know, paracetamol, whichever the brand is. You know, you've got things like, I mean, you know, you've got clove, peppermint oils. They're great for toothache. You can, you know, gargling with sea salt is great for toothache. You know, you've got arnica montana, you've got hypericum, you've got magnesium phos and chamomilla. These are all great homeopathic preparations that get rid of pain. You've got herbals like capsaicin, you've got bromelain, chamomile, you've got scutellaria, which is skullcap. All of these things are pretty good at bringing down pain if you know how to use them. So, you know, my advice is, before you get the pain, which is now, you start to look for a good herbalist or a good homeopath and get to know them, and then have things ready so that when you get a problem, you're not on the back foot and you can help deal with this.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Graham. We'll move on, but you know, the main message to take out of this, I think, is that we need to keep an eye on this type of research and see what develops over time, and whether this does give us an explanation as to perhaps why people are becoming a little less sympathetic to things that are going on around them. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, so what's next?
Well, really, let's give a classic example. Okay, thank you, Graham. Let's give a classic example of a subject where there should be outrage in the country about. Okay, so we should have outrage in the country about what's actually happening around children. And this Guardian story just, well, I'm going to use the word incredible, but Judge Hogg, hands a little girl back to a father who's already been dangerously abusive. And what happens is the little girl dies. So the father was sentenced to life in prison on Tuesday, and his partner Jenny Gray was given 42 months for child cruelty, a cynical and calculated cover-up of their daughter's death. But this only occurred because the child was handed back. Former president of the Association of Directors of Children's Services said, "I think the crux of the matter rests with Mrs. Justice Hogg. The extra steps she took were unwarranted." So we've got a judge not fit for purpose, in my opinion, presiding secret family court, and we've got a child dies. But we're not seeing the outrage across the country. This, hundreds, thousands of other cases, Justice Goddard doing what she's doing in the dark at the moment. There is something which is dumbing people down, Mike, in my opinion.
Yes, well, and of course, Syria, another area where there isn't the outrage. I mean, this is a fantastic headline from Ron Paul, at least. Why does it look like the US is rescuing ISIS? And of course, this is something that we've been trying to highlight for quite some time, that the US, through its policy, is protecting the terrorists in Syria. And again, there's no outrage about this. Perhaps there's no understanding. Now, unfortunately, the Ron Paul article doesn't quite live up to the headline, but at least Ron Paul is moving in this direction. He's saying the ongoing war in Syria may see some escalation soon. A report that 51 State Department employees out of 13,000 Foreign Service officers signed a memo urging President Obama to change his focus in Syria from fighting ISIS to fighting the secular Assad government has caused quite a stir. The fact that such a small number of individuals could make this a noteworthy story shows that propaganda continues to reign supreme. It makes no sense that the US can weaken ISIS by attacking its main opponent, i.e. Assad. We're constantly smothered in rhetoric about how America must stop ISIS, yet ISIS has been on the ropes and in trouble. The group has been on the run. And what does the US want to do? They want to hurry up and bomb Assad, which they've been trying to do for 5 years now. And he goes on to say, an American in Orlando lost his mind and shot 50 people dead. The response is to go across the world and attack Assad in Syria. Such illogic reminds me of the US attacking Iraq after 9/11. It made no sense then, makes no sense now, and it accomplished nothing but the creation of chaos and, ironically, ISIS itself. Well, Ron Paul suggesting that's ironic, but perhaps that was the policy.
That was the policy.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the referendum because, of course, it's our last day before the vote.
Can I say thank goodness?
I'd say so for the EU referendum PSYOP, the puppet show, but of course it's coming to some form of resolution. Here's the BBC. Welcome to the BBC. Both sides in final campaign push ahead of the EU referendum. Isn't it remarkable? There's two Tories who are obviously great buddies from school, and we're led to believe they're on different sides. But a very interesting email which came through to us today. I'll just read this very quickly. It says, "Hi Brian, last week I gave a talk in the local community hall on the advantages of leaving the EU. About 10 people turned up, so not bad really. I was surprised to see a reporter in the front row with a good quality microphone and recording device taking shorthand. Immediately prior to the start of the presentation, he told me he was from the BBC. He'd seen my advert entitled Leave the EU. And as I was setting up my laptop, he was busy telling everyone that it's mostly old people who vote to leave. And he left after about 20 minutes. Now, it's very interesting, Mike. Yesterday we showed on that graph that in the poll, basically, it was the older generation that was warning about the dangers of the EU. Here's the BBC on the prowl saying, well, if you want to leave, you're basically an old fuddy-duddy and don't really get involved. So the BBC clearly stirring the political pot. And we'd like to remind people, of course, that there have been many, many reports over the last year to do with fraud within the British voting system. And this was a Telegraph article saying that postal voting fraud was easy. And who'd said that? Well, Electoral Commissioner. So is this going to be a straight vote? Personally, I don't think so, which is why David Cameron has arranged for the whole of the voting system to produce one final result as opposed to it being reported by local areas where, of course, people would have a feel for who's voting what. But how's the campaign going on the ground? Well, let's turn to Plymouth because a lot of very interesting material coming in. This is a headline from Plymouth Herald, and I've labelled this Strategic Industry Comments because the front page says 30 Plymouth businesses have signed an open letter urging the UK to stay in. And the lady featuring there is the chief executive from Rio. We'll come on to that in a second, but basically they said that Plymouth is going to be better off if we vote to stay in. There's good trade with Europe. The Treasury has estimated that 250,000 Southwest jobs are necessary, are created by Europe. Millions of pounds have been given to Plymouth. Well, what is Rio to come out with this this statement? Here's their website, and we just highlight, we believe that social enterprise has the power to change the world. So this lady and her small team apparently are there to change the world. They're not in manufacturing, they're not in industry, they're not actually producing anything. They're sort of social consultants to non-government organisations, really, Mike.
Well, I mean, we're going to be talking about cities shortly, and this is all part of it, because this is why the EU referendum is a PSYOP, because governance is changing before our eyes.
To these sorts of people and their values. So here's part of what they do: social enterprise solutions, consultancy, training, business support. Have a look at who their customers are, Plymouth City Council and other organisations who are not directly as part of manufacturing, and have a look at our team. Check this for yourself. Don't just take our opinion on it. Go and have a look at the website. But my attention was caught by Jack Harrison down in the bottom right-hand corner, because this young man is apparently out on the streets helping advise teenagers as how they can get good quality jobs. Well, we could have a debate about that. But let's have a look at some of the material that's been pouring in through the door. We've got this one here, Your Future at Stake. It tells us that the EU is going to be helping to change the world climate. It's all about here we are, massive. And what sort of people have we got behind this? Well, we've got Richard Branson, we've got an NUS president, we've got J.K. Rowling, so obviously a key lady for industry and jobs. We've got this one here. This is voting for the future. A little bit of green on this, so it'll go a bit odd on the camera maybe, but we've got some cartoon type information. And we've got this one. Well, let's bring this up on screen and then we can talk through where Plymouth's going. Well, Plymouth's families are better off in Europe, apparently. And the Treasury is saying that if we leave the EU, 250,000 jobs are going to disappear.
Well, that's very strange because George Osborne tweeted out that 10,000 jobs would disappear earlier on today in Dorset and Devon.
Oh, in 2 counties?
Yes.
Oh dear.
So the rest must be going from Cornwall then?
We're not too sure there. So let's have a look at this leaflet because it's utterly brilliant. We'll highlight this gentleman and we're going to come back to him, a former Commodore. He fails to state that, of course, he's a strong Labour political supporter, but he's backing in. We've got a boss in one of the local universities, St Mark and St John. She admits that her organisation only survives because of the EU handouts, and of course she's very keen to stay in. And then it goes on. We've got some great stuff. We've got to stay in the EU because of funding of the National Marine Aquarium. So we've got a fish tank, and that's the reason the nation should stay in the EU. 300,000 for Plymouth Fisheries. Yet it was the EU fisheries policy that decimated British fishing. So that sounds common sense, Mike. If we go down here, they want 2.5 million from the EU for a small business park and new homes. And I've put there, of course, years gone back in a huge dockyard. The dry docks are still there. We used to build major warships. Now Plymouth is begging at the EU begging bowl for 2.5 million. And we'll bring in the last one. We've got to stay in the EU because the local Theatre Royal needs more EU cash. So this is, of course, Will Straw suggesting that Plymouth begs for yet more handouts from the EU, otherwise we can't survive.
We've got to be dependent.
We must be dependent. So a lot of material here, let's rattle through. Here's the former Commodore, Gareth Derrick, and he was also standing for police commissioner, but apparently he wasn't common purpose enough because the common purpose candidate won. But he had some things to say. He said Plymouth makes a direct contribution to the UK and global security.
Excellent.
But through our naval base and strong connections with all 3 armed services. Confident in our security cooperation across Europe, we can continue to build a safer world for our children. So we've got to stay in the EU to be safe. Contrast it with what this guy says, Major General Julian Thompson. The result of this referendum will determine irrevocably what kind of country we, our children and our grandchildren will live in. Either Great Britain will remain in the EU, dominated by people who we do not elect, who we cannot throw out and who dictate many of the laws which govern us, or we will take back control and return to what we were, an independent country in which our parliament is elected by us and answerable to us as the lawmaker. So we've got a real person there, Mike, versus a former Commodore disgracefully spewing out Labour political rhetoric. And this is the standard of the campaigning across the country. Who's driving it? Well, here he is, David Cameron. That hand is a little bit too clean. This was the original article that we focused on back for VE Day, the last British dam buster. So men like that gentleman risking their lives for this country, and of course Cameron working behind our backs to break up the EU and to break up the UK and draw us into the European Union. We've called it treason. We're going to stick by that. It's treason, albeit softly spoken. And of course, Breitbart here picked up on the very same theme. When our army may be cut to 50,000, the smell of treason is becoming offensive. Is it a surprise that the government's got twitchy about people talking about traitors, Mike?
Don't think so.
So there we are. The press are starting to report it. And we are going to say, as UK Column, we've warned and warned again that the aim is to strip Britain of our own military power so that we can be subsumed into that EU control structure. And that's now taking place pretty quickly. Part of the tactics for that is the creation of a supposed expanded reserve system for the military. And strange coincidence that the Commodore we've just featured, that was his job up until 2013. So I wonder whether there was a bit of political motivation in that work of the military. So let's have a look at one of these other posters here. This is the cartoon style. It seems to be aimed at children. We've got to be in for all sorts of good reasons, jobs. What else have we got here? Rights at work. You won't have any rights at work if we leave the EU, apparently, Mike.
Didn't have any before.
No, probably true. Okay, and if you have a look on the reverse side, well, we've got Mr. Corbyn, and well, he's a bit of a chameleon because, of course, he was the man saying, well, I didn't vote for the EU, but all of a sudden he started to vote for the EU. So do you think we can trust this guy?
No comment.
Okay, we'll leave the silence. And I thought this was particularly nice. Somebody sent it in to us. We'll put both pages up on screen and you can pause it and have a look. But they were quotes from people connected to the European project. One gentleman said, I've never understood why public opinion about European ideas should be taken into account. That was Raymond Barre, the former French Prime Minister. Well, we've got Jean Monnet, of course, the founder of the movement. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation. And we just do one more because in 1972, Ted Heath, that great traitor, said, there's no question of eroding any national sovereignty. There is no blueprint for a federal Europe. There are some in this country who fear that in going into Europe, we shall in some way sacrifice independence and sovereignty. These fears, I need hardly say, are completely unjustified. But he later admitted to lying to Parliament and the British people. And in 1990, the very same Edward Heath, in response to the question, did you have in mind the United States of Europe in 1972, quietly replied, of course, yes. So there we are, the government prepared to lie to us, and I don't think it's the press that's actually going to be taking us through the detail of that, particularly not the BBC. So the saviour is who, do you think, Mike?
Well, it's got to be Boris.
It's got to be Boris. So encourage people to have a look at this wonderful video. Boris Johnson declares June the 23rd is Independence Day. Here he is on stage in front of quite a big audience. And I think a few people will notice that hand with the thumb neatly placed on top. And basically, he gives an emotional speech, which is clearly setting himself up to be the saviour of Britain and the British. So this man apparently is the man we should trust. Brexit, we're going to say, is going to be successful. And then up pops Boris Johnson to say, well, clearly I'm the man to replace Cameron.
I believe that's exactly what's going to happen.
There's a possibility. Well, let's just remind ourselves about Boris Johnson. So these are reports, obviously, from national papers. He demanded control of London's courts and prosecutors in a power battle with Whitehall. So we're going to put a Prime Minister in post, possibly, who says, well, I should have personal control of the courts. We say he's not a buffoon, he's a very dangerous man. And these are some of the areas that he was taking control of: transport, housing, metropolitan police, criminal justice system. And this is his deputy coming up with this comment: the criminal justice system should be held to account as the Met is in London. Otherwise, these are unaccountable agencies not answering to the people of London. Well, of course, that was the great lie, because they want them answerable, or at the time, to Boris Johnson.
Yes.
And let's remember his great friend here, which is George Osborne. But the headline will lead us in nicely to the next subject: a Boris in every city. Osborne wants powerful mayors to take charge of health, housing and transport. So we get a glimpse here, Mike, of future policy under a Boris Prime Minister, cities devolution bill, Devo Mank, and we've highlighted this before because this leads us to Respublica, and Philip Blond, who is the man who has written much on the fact we need these city-states.
Yes, so that agenda continues to move on apace. Here is the Centre for Cities, and they're hosting a series of conferences, or series of talks this week. And on Monday, they were hosting none other than Dr. Benjamin Barber, who is the author of If Mayors Ruled the World. And he was giving a talk at the Shard in London. And just to give a bit of background on this, the Centre for Cities spiel here says, today UK cities are highly fragmented, with almost all political or economic powers held at the national level. Outside of London, mayor conurbations are divided between multiple small local authorities, with leadership selected indirectly by local councillors rather than by voters. And so they're calling on people to vote for elected mayors. This is great in principle, but I think we've demonstrated recently that this is a definite change in the relationship between the individual and the nation. So here is Benjamin Barber. He said that he's not an urbanist in his talk. He said that he's not an urbanist in particular. He is a political theorist. He said that cities are not a level of government. Cities, in fact, he says, are the original human community, and therefore we need more of them and more powerful cities. He said that governments are constitutionally incapable of putting their own interests aside and working together to find solutions. I'm not quite sure what solutions he's talking about. He said this: for 5,000 years, the rural population has dominated the world. It's responsible for many of the problems we have today. So the rural population is responsible, according to Barber, for all the problems that we have today. He said that cities such as Colorado had attempted to ban fracking, but that had been overturned because by the state government because that was unconstitutional. He also said that, of course, attempts to ban assault rifles had been overturned by federal courts because of the Second Amendment. He said when Germany gets bigger, was the example he gave, when Germany gets bigger, as its neighbours learned, Belgium and Poland get smaller, but Brussels, Berlin and Warsaw can all flourish together, apparently. So nations invade other countries, but cities, they don't do these kinds of things. They just get on with each other and move ahead. He said the division between city, suburb, exurb and countryside is artificial. Medieval cities had it about right. The city was the market town for the surrounding rural areas. So this is what he's calling for. And he said in the long term, we will have to think about metropolitan regions, but there will be suburbs that don't want it. And so you can see where this is going. We're talking about not just city-states, but region states as well. Here is a coalition of European mayors who have written an open letter to EU leaders on World Refugee Day. They're saying, we are a continent born out of the ruins of nationalism and war, and we thrive on peace and cooperation. Only by working together can we overcome the challenges brought on by war, poverty, persecution in other parts of the world. 11 mayors, as I say, signed it. They are the executive committee of the Eurocities. So there was the mayor of Nantes, the mayor of Birmingham City Council, the mayors of Barcelona, Florence, Ghent, Leipzig, Rotterdam, Stockholm, Vienna, and Warsaw, amongst others. They said it falls to us, the leaders of major European cities, to get integration right. Many refugees and asylum seekers will settle in our cities, and we must assure that they're given a decent start in our communities. So, what I'm trying to point out here, and what our article, the Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate, and Brendan Barber, by the way, is the person who sort of initiated this process of creating the Global Parliament of Mayors. This is a change in the way we're being governed. It's happening under the surface. While everybody's looking at the EU, it's busy establishing itself. The Parliament of Mayors is going to meet for the first time in September. And what this open letter from the European city mayors demonstrates is that any notion of being able to control borders and being able to manage immigration and therefore the services that are needed to be provided, this policy is increasingly no longer a national policy. Cities are wanting to take this policy away from national governments. And so our borders really aren't in our own hands anymore if we allow this agenda to move forward.
No, all moving under the surface, hidden in plain sight, isn't it? Isn't it, Mike? What's going on here? And think of the scale of this. What we're talking about, it's absolutely massive. Absolutely nothing about it in the mainstream press and how it affects us, our constitution, operating as a nation state. And we could contrast it. I'll just bring this on screen again with this sort of material coming around about the European Union. You don't get the effect on camera, but the whole of this map is it's very cartoonish, very childish about jobs and paid holiday and parental leave. Cheaper holidays is a reason that we should stay locked into a dictatorship. Meanwhile, all of this is going on under the surface. And how did the EU bribe officials in UK? You put them together in multinational groups with great locations, lots of excellent food, lots of good wine, lots of sunshine, made them all feel good about each other. And then it dragged their loyalty across to the European Union. And this is what I would say is being done with these initial meetings of the mayors, which is that they're being bribed by the surrounding, the power, the opulence in the meetings.
Absolutely. And so we're seeing the end of national sovereignty and a replacement with some other form of democracy, which perhaps
medieval city-states run by people like Boris Johnson.
And they're claiming we're going to elect mayors, but I think people aren't going to recognise the type of governance that we see establishing itself.
Well,
David Cameron.
Well, we'll finish off because if Boris Johnson is lining himself up to be the successor to this man, we've got a report here. This was from a little while ago, but from the Mirror, particularly good. David Cameron and top Tories handed 3 million windfall by rich backers. Here's the corporate interests who stay in the shadows. They say that Cameron had received a cool 500,000 with another 200,000 going to his constituency. This is the constituency where all the Leave banners were being destroyed. George Osborne, 330,000 in personal donations, so he's got some powerful friends, with the same amount for his Cheshire constituency. So both these men are being backed by hidden, very wealthy people. We're not allowed, but this is the one I wanted to remind people about, because in this article it said, but the biggest winner was Boris Johnson, tipped for a leadership challenge, who declared donations of almost 600,000. So these people are absolutely the puppets of rich banking interests who are driving them for their own corporatist agendas, the city-state.
Yes. But look at what we've got coming out today. I would imagine this is we're going to see many more headlines like this. This is Telegraph here saying that Yvette Cooper has alerted police over a death threat tweet about the EU referendum. So the tweet said that she was sending out pro-EU propaganda, and it said, "Please stop, or I will kill your kids and grandkids." Not a very nice thing to receive, but nonetheless, there is a thread building in the media about MPs being under threat.
Yeah, so you're putting a block between constituents and their MPs.
It is a nudging exercise, and it implies that there's a disconnect between people, and that disconnect is increasing. MPs are under threat, and we've got to protect them.
Just a reminder here, isn't this lady the partner or wife of Ed Balls?
Yes.
The Bilderberger.
Yes.
So we've got Ed Balls going into those meetings behind closed doors with banks who we know, many of whom are corrupt involved in criminal activity. And here's his partner, wife, she may be, I don't know, campaigning now to actually get this elite political class even further away from any contact with voters.
Absolutely. And another EU referendum nudge, pushing people perhaps towards Brexit. I don't know. But the Queen apparently asking guests at a dinner, give me 3 good reasons why Britain should be part of Europe. And of course, in this article, they say, well, the Queen remains politically neutral, so she wasn't making any particular statement about whether we should be in or out. But the question certainly implies that, or at least the article implies that we should believe that she wants us to come out. So that's a little nudge. But earlier on, we were talking about the proportion of people who might be voting one way or the other. Patrick Henningsen put a little poll on his website. I suppose you could say perhaps this reflects 21st Century Wire's readership more than anything else, but the result is quite interesting nonetheless. 81% wanting to leave, 19% wanting to remain. That's based on about 1,400 votes in the last 24 hours. So he stopped the poll long enough for me to get this screenshot. He's going to open it up again after this program to get some last minute opinions. But
well, it's interesting stuff, Mike, and a lot of debate over the internet amongst the email circuits where people are saying in their local areas all they're hearing is people talking about leave, but we're still seeing these so-called national polls where apparently it's, well, leave's 6 points ahead or 7 points ahead. Vote rigging, I think the plan was to rig the votes. However, the number of people who wanted to leave was just so much greater that they had to do something a little more extreme.
Yeah.
Was that a man suffering mental illness who was prompted to attack an MP? Is that what they did? I don't know.
I think that's it for today.
That is it for today. So we're sorry we weren't able to get Alex Thompson on. Skype didn't seem to want to play for some reason, but we'll see whether we can bring him on another time. And I can already see from the comments about Dr. Graham Downing that you appreciated that update on the dangers of big pharma medication. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Join us then. Thank you. Bye-bye.